What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Long Game Podcast hosted by Thomas Kopelman and Jacob Turner. In each episode, you'll hear us break down financial topics that are relevant to you and your situation. Our goal is to help bring credible financial information to you in short, bite-sized episodes.
All opinions expressed on this show are for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. Nothing on the Long Game Podcast should be considered advice. Always consult with your team of professionals before making any decisions regarding your finances. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Long Game Podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Thomas Kopelman, and on today's show, we have Darren Heitner. And Darren, I'm going to read this off because I want to get this right. Darren's the founder of Heitner Legal, was named one of the top 25 most influential figures in NIL, and was recognized to the 40 under 40 list of the University of Florida, his alma mater. So you've been on CBS, ESPN, Fox News, and now the Long Game. Darren, thanks for coming on, man.
This is the best one yet. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm excited to talk about Heitner Legal and the business you've built, helping to protect athletes and their money. But before we start with that, would love for you to give our audience a little bit of a sneak peek into your journey from sports agent to Heitner Legal. And you mentioned that you're almost 10 years in now, so I like to joke that you're an overnight success.
Yeah, exactly. It just happened out of nowhere. So if we go back now, gosh, it's almost 20 years. But going into my first year of law school, I had decided that I wanted to be a sports agent. And so this was 2007. I started up a sports agency from scratch. The only experience I had in the business was between my sophomore and junior years of undergrad. I had an internship at a sports agency in Atlanta, Georgia, that primarily focused on baseball, golfers, broadcasters, coaches, and then had some good brand relationships as well. I went back to school where I was a nightlife promoter at the time to make my way through college and have some money on the side for fun, and decided to start up a website called Sports Agent Blog. This was my New Year's resolution of 2005. So the site still remains live today. I wouldn't say it's nearly as active as it once was, but that was my foray into the world of sports primarily, writing about sports agency, news and updates, doing interviews with experienced agents, etc. And so in 2007, going into my first year of law school, I started up the sports agency from scratch. I actually started it with a partner who was writing for my blog, who I had never met in person before. Ultimately, we did meet actually on a recruiting trip that I had taken to Illinois to recruit a basketball player that we did not end up signing. But I worked on building that business for the 3 years of law school. Ultimately, after graduation, thinking I was going to continue to work on building up this business that was a passion of mine at the time, but then quickly learned that I actually enjoyed practicing law. I know it probably surprises any practitioners who may be listening to this podcast, but I enjoyed practicing law more than working on the agency, and did a full pivot within my first year of practicing, ultimately working on building up a practice that at least has an emphasis on representing athletes and agents and brands and other individuals and companies in the space.
Super cool story. I can honestly relate because I almost have the same story in the way that I started with a blog. I was like, hey, I want to work with people. What better way than to like showcase what you know? My partner of All Street Wealth, we met online. We had never met in person when we launched All Street Wealth. We didn't meet in person till he came to like record some videos and things that we were going to put out about it, but we knew for a couple years. But I love like the pivot that you made in figuring it out, because I have worked with a lot of attorneys. All of them are on the goal of how do we get done the fastest. So I think it's really cool that like everybody dreams about being a sports agent. Like I know I did. I remember sitting in my dining room with my family when I was, 12 or 13. I was like, I'm going to play pro sports and then I'm going to be a sports agent because that seems really, really cool. And now I have a couple friends who are sports agents and it does seem really, really cool, but it's still a grind, right? It's like any job. It sounds cool to be a head football coach in college until you realize you travel 75% of the year. Like there's always good and bad in every cool job.
You know, what doesn't sound cool is failing or sounding like you're giving up. And that's something that I wrestled with at the time, because when I decided to pivot, I was roughly 3.5 to 4 years into building this business, which certainly wasn't enough time to truly determine whether or not it was ultimately going to be successful long term. But I had to do a lot of introspection, deep thinking, talking to close friends and colleagues who I trusted to come to the proper conclusion as to whether or not I was hitting a dip or really a dead end where it made sense to do a switch, a big switch, obviously, a massive career change for me. And now it's pretty funny because, fortunately, and I don't take this for granted, I represent some of the biggest sports agents and agencies in the country that seek outside counsel. And I so often hear from them, they say, Darren, you made the genius move. We wish we were in your position where we weren't agents, but instead catering to all of the agents who have all of these issues that aren't necessarily always made public.
I think that's a really interesting pivot though, right? I think the lesson that you learned in there, and I talk about this all the time, is like, the adult life isn't like school, right? There really isn't failing. There's just learning. And I think for a lot of people, it would be really hard to make that pivot because of ego, right? Like you're just thinking about everybody else. Like I've been talking about being a sports agent, like I'm going to be this best sports agent. And all of a sudden you realize like, hey, I might like something and be better at something else. Like what is everybody else going to think? And I think the average person just doesn't make the move because they're worried about what people think. And, I think it kind of shows the confidence that you have in yourself and the ability to make the decision that's best for you, not the one that just is like, how does everybody else view me if I do this?
At the same time, hindsight's 2020. We're talking now 14 years later. At the beginning, it was a lot of questioning myself at the time of making the decision and pretty soon thereafter. Especially a year into practicing where I was doing a lot of insurance defense work that if you talk to any attorney, it's not very interesting nor very pleasing to be spending time drafting discovery and protecting insurers against claims that are lodged against them. But in my spare time, I did everything that I could to kind of break outside of that. And with patience and making sure that I remained true to my passions and goals, I was able to ultimately not only work at that first firm for a year and then pivot even within the scope of law to working with someone much my elder who had broken from his prior firm to start a new one. And we were literally working exactly a year after I started practicing. I moved down from Fort Lauderdale to Miami, and we were working on folding chairs and folding tables, literally. And speaking to very sometimes prominent people, but getting this new venture started, and that in many ways actually helped me 3.5 years thereafter breaking off as well and starting my own firm because I sort of saw firsthand what that looks like. But again, we're talking 14 years now since I started practicing. And we could be talking about all the great parts of that. And believe me, I'm very thankful and blessed. But if we were having this conversation 12, 13 years ago, I might be shaking a little bit, a little worried.
So I'm curious because a lot of the folks that Thomas and I work with are either entrepreneurs or in my case, maybe athletes. They have this ability and desire to want to bet on themselves. And I think we always often hear like this mantra of like, you just got to keep going. The only failure is quitting. And I think you make a great point, like this idea that I wasn't quitting, I was transitioning from one thing to the next. So it's really a two-part question. One is you said you talked to some of your friends about like, here's what I'm thinking. But ultimately, what was the tipping point for you to ultimately burn the ships and say, I'm going all in on something else? And then also, when you decided to do that, how did you react like 6 months in? Because we all know that like the first 6 months, year of the journey can oftentimes be the loneliest, oftentimes be the hardest. When you're 6 months into making this decision that I burned the ships, I'm doing something completely different, what led you to keep going?
So in my practice, when I get a compound question like that, I usually object because it's always very hard to remember what those two questions are because you want to fully invest yourself in answering both. So I'll do my best to remember what both of those questions are and answering. And if I forget, please remind me. And I'll make a side note, which is whenever I hear bet on yourself, I always think of Fred Van Vliet, who I've
I'm from
had the
Rockford.
opportunity of representing actually in
Let's
intellectual
go.
property matters before. So, and had an interesting one related to Bet on Yourself. To your first question about, what were the driving factors to basically go off on my own. And again, I did that after working at two different firms, one for 1 year, and then the second one for roughly 3.5 years. I give people a lot of credit. I hear sometimes people go straight out of law school into creating their own firms. God bless them. It wouldn't have been right for me, particularly because I didn't do any clerking when I was in law school. So I had no appreciation for a lot of the minutia of practicing. But there were a multitude of factors. But the biggest one was actually somewhat of a life-changing event. And I like getting this question because it happened so long ago now, roughly 10 years ago, that I forget, and I like to be remembered. I was driving down, I had spent the night at my parents' house the night before, and I was driving down on I-95. My parents live up in Hollywood, Florida, which is about 45 minutes north of Miami, where my law office was that I was working at. And I was driving down very early in the morning. I think I had left my parents' house at about 6 a.m. To cover for my boss, who was a part of this networking group called BNI. And so I was driving down, and 95 can be a very scary highway. And I was on the express lane, and lo and behold, all of a sudden I get bumped from behind. And fortunately, there wasn't a lot of traffic at the time, but all of a sudden I feel myself going in 360 motions and finally ending up stopped facing oncoming traffic with cars dodging me, going about, anywhere between 65 to 85 miles an hour. If any of those cars had touched me, we wouldn't be here today having this conversation. When that happened, I started really thinking deeply about whether I was fully satisfied and, more importantly, happy in life, and in particular with respect to my career. And wondering, if not then, roughly 4.5 years into practicing, moving off and doing my own thing, then when? And would I get so deep into a hole that I couldn't break out and go off on my own and just become what a lot of people know and feel as being comfortable, which is a really scary thing in my belief. Oftentimes we get comfortable and feel afraid to venture off and be entrepreneurial and test the waters and break free. So that was a key moment. And I started thinking about the fact that this person I was working with was like 20, 30 years my older. And I would oftentimes tell my own clients, I've got this person to help out with like big federal court hearings and whatnot, that my clients were actually asking me to be lead counsel instead of him. And I'm like, well, if that's the case, do I really need to stay there? I was being promised a lot by my boss with respect to raises or becoming partner or even having my name attached to the firm, and feeling as though I was constantly being told something would happen without it actually occurring. And that bothered me quite a bit. And another item is I spoke with my clients that I was bringing in, and almost all of the work that I was doing was based on clients that I was generating myself. And those individuals, and even people that my boss had brought in and pushed to me to handle, were constantly edging me and saying, start up your own firm, we will go with you. And that was a huge benefit, because while there was certainly a lot of risk in leaving and filling my plate on a day-to-day basis, I at least knew that I had people who were not only there to continue to be my clients and provide funding, but were championing me. And that helped a lot and gave me the confidence to make the push to start up my own firm.
I feel like this is like the common story that I hear among all of the successful business owners I work with is, one, like, we weren't really ready. But I think this is like a thing that we can all see in life is like, you're never going to be ready, right? And almost the later you wait to start a business, the less ready you're going to be, because you're farther on in life. You probably have a bigger house, a bigger mortgage. You probably have kids. There's a lot more risk associated with it versus, right, if you start a business at 28 and you fail, in all reality, you're probably actually more employable than somebody who has never went out and tried to do things on your own, because you might have realized like, hey, I'm really good at being a lawyer. I realize maybe I'm not as good of an operator and now I want to come back and fit in. But a lot of success in life does come from being ready to take the risk. And it's honestly the same with people who are successful at their W-2 job. They're willing to say, I probably am not ready for this next role, but I know that I can figure it out and I'll do whatever it takes to figure it out. And that's just something that I see among pretty much every successful person.
That's a really good point. There's so much unknown too. So you made the point that you could fail in managing and running a law firm, but still be very marketable as a lawyer. Interestingly, such a large component of the work that I do now is not just doing legal research, drafting, actually litigating and trial or an arbitration, et cetera, but it's having those conversations with potential new clients. It's sending them engagement letters. It's answering the questions that they have prior to retaining my firm. It's a lot of administration, even with respect to billing and managing a calendar and ensuring that deadlines aren't missed. Things that as a lawyer, or I guess any W-2 employee, as you mentioned, or maybe even a 1099, you don't have to really think about because there's someone else who's managing it and dictating all of that to you. And it's not for everyone. And I respect that too. And that is actually not the same as the comment that I made before with respect to being comfortable. You just may not want or have the desire or passion or capacity to run your own company and still be an excellent, excellent worker and do very, very well economically and be happy. That's the bottom line. So a lot of it is knowing who you are and what you want and what you're good at. And just because you may not be the right person to run a company and you're better as an employee doesn't in any way diminish who you are as a person.
Yeah,
I
it's definitely
think
not
that's
the
a
right
great.
path.
Yeah, I think it's a great point because if you think about just like entrepreneurship for the three of us, right? I know for me, I didn't grow up with this dream of starting a business. And when you talk about your story, Darren, like you didn't have this like sole goal when you got done at the University of Florida, like I'm definitely starting my own law firm. You're like, hey, I'm going to be a sports agent. Maybe I'll find a partner to work with. Maybe I'll find somebody to work underneath. Thomas, I know before you started All Street, you were an employee, and I can't think that All Street was top of mind at that time. But ultimately, like some of your experiences in your journey led to this crossroads where you said like, hey, it's either now or never. And if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go all in. But Darren, I think you make a great point. We live in this like hustle culture where everybody wants to be an entrepreneur, or entrepreneurship is really glorified. And the reality is entrepreneurship is not right for everybody. And I talked to my wife about this because my wife is super smart, but she would never want to start a business because much like you said, there's a million other things that come along with owning that business that you don't think about. And I know for me personally, and I'm curious what your guys' perspective is on this. When we started Moment, one of the biggest things that was a surprise to me was just the fact that my brain essentially never shuts off. And if you want to start the business, like you have to be willing to have like, it's Sunday and I'm not quote unquote working and my brain is not shutting off. And I totally underestimated that in any other position I'd ever been in where somebody else was running the show, that like, hey, when I'm not here, I can just shut off and like, I'll circle back on Monday when it's time to regroup. So I'm curious if you guys have had a similar experience in entrepreneurship.
100%. And if I'm going to be very transparent, which obviously I want to be with you, if I'm envious of anyone else out there, in particular, your full-time W-2 employees, it's that they can put on their out of office email response. They can travel the world during a vacation and not even bring a computer or really even leave their phone at home if they wanted to. We don't have that luxury. I wake up, I have a lot of clients who are actually in the Far East. It's been a bigger emphasis of my firm's growth over the past couple of years. And so, all of us, I think, are very used to having to deal with a barrage of emails and phone calls from, let's say, 9 to 5, right? The typical workday. But I wake up any morning and I probably have 20 to 40 unread emails based on all of that. And so literally the moment I wake up to the moment that I put aside my phone to lay down in bed, I am on. And that is true on weekends too. And I give a lot of credit to those who are in our positions of, I guess you could call it being entrepreneurs, but certainly being business owners, those who do that and then have spouses who also do the same. Because I
Mm.
think one reason why I'm able to do what I do is because my wife is, well, now not a full time employee, a part time since we started having kids, but she is not trying to run her own business at the same time. Because if we both had that sudden barrage, let's say on a Saturday morning where there's no school, where our kids are somewhere else, it would be very difficult. So we can help each other out. If I'm busy, she can take on a bigger workload. If I have some downtime, I can, fully immerse myself with my kids. But when you have a household of just pure entrepreneurs and business owners, that's got to be so hard because, to your point, it's like the brain is always going. And at least I know with respect to me and my firm, and a big reason why my firm has grown so much so quickly is because attorneys tend to be terrible communicators. And it's rare that I'm not, lightning fast with a response via email. And I can't tell you how many clients I get just as a byproduct of that.
Yeah. I think it's a blessing and a curse, right? I'm the same way. Like I can't shut it off. Like it was over Christmas break. It was a big thing that my fiance was like, "Hey, let's try to just not work from, let's have you not work from Christmas Eve to New Year's Day." And I was like, "You don't get it. Business owners have end of year tax planning. Like they can't make these in January, like blah, blah, blah." And it's like a hard thing to realize. But like I say it's a blessing in the way that like I love working. Like I love running the business. I love growing the business. I have no problem thinking about it. It's a curse in a way that like it's hard at times. It can be hard to be present in other moments because you see a client email or you see other things pop up. And like to me, I'm the same as you, that like I know that I can add a ton of value to that person by it's 8 p.m. It's 5 o'clock their time in California. And they're thinking about this and I can give them the answer that can let them take the next step and actually complete something. It's hard for me to to not want to do it. So we have this awesome thing of entrepreneurship where we can grow our income faster, we can do what we love, we can create our schedule, but also the downside of like because we love it so much that like you're kind of always working and always thinking about it.
I'll give you a very timely reaction to that, and I'm guilty. Right as you were speaking, I was listening to every word. I also just looked at my inbox, had 5 new emails to make sure there was nothing pressing. I heard your words, but because I'm neurotic, and oftentimes we all are as business people, that's something that I did. But I try again to remind myself certain things that I've learned and read. And I'm a big believer in continuing to educate myself primarily through reading. I like fiction, but I read a lot of nonfiction too. But for anyone listening, you may know the name Scott O'Neill. He was an executive in the NBA for some time. He wrote a book titled "Be Where Your Feet Are," and it's a good reminder that it's so important to be present when you can, not just because of the effect that you have on others, but because otherwise, for yourself, you just may be missing out on so many meaningful experiences.
Yeah. I think for us though, I mean, it's probably a reason why we're like this. I mean, a reason why a lot of us are successful at a young age is because we have the wiring to be like this. I mean, if you can always shut it off, you can always not think about things, you're probably going to work a little less hard and probably be not quite at the same spot. So I don't know. There's good and bad to it, but I want to segment over to kind of the NIL stuff and talk through that for, the rest of the time that we have. So obviously like this whole thing was a big change, right? When I went to college, when Jacob went to college, like when you went to college, you weren't getting paid, right? I mean, I remember sitting there and you hear the stories of LeBron and the Hummer and the shoes showing up and like you would be careful. Like you couldn't accept any money. I remember like I couldn't even bet on an NCAA bracket with my friends in high school because I didn't want to lose my amateur status. And now we live in a
You probably
completely
could have
different
done that
world.
and been okay, but yeah.
For sure. But that's like you show up to every AAU
Safety
tournament, right?
first, safety first, Darren.
Yeah,
Well,
right,
every
yeah.
AAU tournament I'd go to, you'd sit in that room, they'd put on that video, and all they would do is harp on you about amateur status and all of these things. So I'd love for you to kind of share really quickly kind of the changing landscape, how it is. And I really want to go through like the revenue streams, how people are actually getting paid. What are these numbers looking like? And then I think it'd be cool for us to add value for these type of people and be able to share clips of like, what should they be thinking about financial planning wise as well?
Yeah, so NIL, abbreviated NIL for name, image, and likeness, which really is a microcosm of a person's right of publicity, which was developed from the theory of an individual's right to privacy. The concept of right of publicity was derived over the past century, with certain states passing statutes to give individuals the right to go after people and companies that use their names, image, likenesses, etc., without their consent in commercialized advertising. So basically, a way to compensate them for how they traditionally would have been compensated, typically in the form of a royalty. Uh, Roughly half the states developed statutes on the books. The other states recognized this right, but just through case law that was developed over time. In that same span of time, in comes the NCAA, decides, well, our athletes are amateurs. We are bound by rules of amateurism. This is not professional sports. Athletes shouldn't be compensated. They're provided their scholarships. They're provided up to full amounts of money to cover their cost of attendance and tuition. And we believe that within the scope of amateurism, it is only right that athletes be denied the same rights that other individuals have, which is to exploit the value attached to their name, images, and likenesses. In 2019, the state of California led the charge to attempt to change this. It was the first state to pass a bill turned into law, but it wasn't to go effective until 2023, 4 years after its passing and signing into law. States like mine of Florida decided to push the envelope more, ultimately passing legislation that said it would go effective July 1, 2021. We then saw this snowball. Many other states passed similar legislation, and many states had it signed into law. When we get very close to July 1, 2021, the NCAA says we have to do something about this. We can't have an ecosystem where, let's say, 15, 20 states are allowing this sweeping NIL rights, and here we are telling everybody else, including people in those states, that they cannot enjoy such rights. And so June 30, 2021, the NCAA says, okay, we're going to institute an interim NIL policy. Here we are, over 2 years later. It's still technically called an interim NIL policy, but it opens up the door for all college athletes to enter into NIL deals. There just always has to be quid pro quo. The athlete does something in exchange for the money or consideration being provided. It can't be an inducement to commit to or enroll at a school. We all laugh about that now because obviously we're seeing so much of that. It can't be pay for play, which means compensation contingent on participation or earning certain achievements. Similarly, money can't be taken away from athletes if they do not participate. So people question, can the money not be paid if there's an injury? Or can it be pulled if there is an injury? The answer is no under the NCAA's rules. And finally, that schools can't directly pay players for their NIL. Now, things may be changing as we're talking here today. There's actually a proposal for schools to finally be able to compensate athletes directly.
Oh, really?
For the use of their NIL. Yes, the NCAA at the NCAA convention, the Division I board of the board is considering proposing changes. What have we seen develop over the past 2.5 years? Well, absolutely, those individuals who actually are marketable are entering into endorsement deals to promote real brands, offering goods and services through social media posts, appearances, signing autographs, actually licensing their names, images, and likenesses for those brands to use in their own advertising, on their packaging, etc. We've seen intelligent athletes create their own companies to sell their own products and goods. We've seen guaranteed dollars, royalties, and even equity deals. I just got off the phone with an agent where we were talking about structuring an equity deal for a very prominent player who's extremely marketable. In the height of NFTs, there was a lot of money flowing to athletes with respect to attaching their names, images, and likenesses to that. But at the same time, what we've seen develop is not money being paid to athletes for how marketable they may be, but for the truly talented athletes, particularly at those revenue generating sports, like men's football, men's basketball, we've seen this vacuum being filled because they're not considered to be employees of the universities or the conferences and are not receiving salaries. And so money's being paid to them by boosters and what has developed as NIL collectives to sort of fill that void. And everyone will argue that this is NIL, when in fact, I think you'd have to be quite naive to believe that the bulk of these deals are really based on trying to woo a player to a school, to commit to a school, to stay at a school because of the transfer portal erupting, or actually to pry an athlete from the school that the athlete's currently enrolled at to transfer to another. And that's what's really caused a lot of concern, primarily for the NCAA.
So let me just say, I am glad that athletes are getting paid money in college. As somebody that signed out of high school and got paid for their talent as an 18-year-old, I've seen so many guys go to college, and then ultimately college was the time when they were arguably the most marketable. They were on ESPN the most that they'll ever be in their entire life. And then let's say they go to the NFL and maybe they play for a year as a backup, and then you never hear their name again. You think, man, that guy busted it for 4 years. And yeah, you can argue that, like, yes, he got a scholarship. I understand all that. I'm super appreciative that athletes get scholarships, but like there should be more to it when you're playing on ESPN every single night and roughly earning millions of dollars for all these schools. So let me just say that. Question for you would be, if you were talking to a top high school athlete today with everything that's transpired over the past 2 years, and they asked you, Darren, what could I do to potentially protect myself? And this is a loaded question, but where do I start?
Can I say one?
It is a
thing
loaded question. Yeah, sure.
The one thing I want to say is your comment about the education is like the most like 60-year-old white guy thing to say is like, why do they need to get paid? They get free education. It's
I
like
know.
This guy's at
I hear that
$12,000 a year state tuition, and
I hear that all the
making
time.
school millions of dollars. I know, it's so funny. My uncles say it. Everybody says it. I'm like, oh my!
I made
gosh,
a post about
you guys are
NIL,
insane.
and 10 comments are talking about how, well, they are getting paid. They're getting paid to go to school. And I'm like, guys, let's not be naive to the fact that
They're
these
not there
people are
for
generating
school.
millions and millions of dollars for that same school.
Sorry.
Yeah, I don't want to go down a certain path, but it does tend to be the elder white males, and I don't know for what reason. They just loved college sports as it was, and they are fearful of change. But again, not going down that path. What do I recommend? First and foremost, I'm a big believer, and this isn't for everyone, right? Every athlete is different. Not every athlete is going to be extremely marketable. Not every athlete is extremely talented. Not every athlete has the earning potential, the same earning potential. But if we're talking about either the more talented athletes or the more marketable athletes, the very first thing that I recommend, if I'm in the room early enough, is build a really strong business team. One that also has checks and balances. Don't go to one service provider and ask that service provider to fill out the team, but conduct your own diligence and interview a few people in each area. So that business team typically should be constructed of a very strong lawyer, a strong agent, financial advisor, accountant, maybe a manager separate from the agent. Again, depending on really how prominent the person is. And you definitely want individuals who can work in harmony with each other. And it's great if they've worked with each other in the past, but you don't want people who are in bed with each other. You do want your attorney and financial advisor and accountant, et cetera, to really challenge each other respectfully, but to push each other to do what's best for the athlete and to consider different angles when there's an opportunity and when there's the potential for escalation to a dispute. Outside of that, I think it's important to try to best shield yourself as an individual from potential exposure. Now I'm talking as a lawyer, and that can oftentimes be done in the creation of the typical vehicle being a limited liability company. And this is something you may want to talk about with your financial advisor or your accountant, but you can file as an LLC and then be taxed as an S corp. If you're generating enough income over a certain threshold, it makes sense from an economic standpoint. And so by filing and incorporating in such a way, I recommend signing agreements with third parties where you're signing on behalf of the LLC, furnishing the services of the athlete. Again, from my perspective, you're shielding yourself personally from potential liability. From my understanding and speaking with financial advisors and accountants, there may also be benefits if you can justify expenses that are related to the actual business that the LLC is handling. So those are preliminary conversations. Additionally, for the more marketable players, we look into starting to consider protecting intellectual property. And it's very important on the trademark side, where when I first started practicing, again, roughly 15 years ago, I could file an application, and if there were no bumps in the road, I could have a registration for a client within 5 months of the application. Today, for a multitude of reasons, which I won't get into unless you ask me to, it typically takes about 15 months from application to registration. So the sooner that we can start that process, the better, particularly if there are going to be any bumps in the road by way of an office action or otherwise.
I think this is good starting advice. And I don't even think this is just NIL related or athlete related. Like almost everything you said for the person who's rendering any services and being paid, like those are generally the best steps to start. And I think like some things that maybe we haven't even talked about before. And I think the importance of that team is like, you don't know what you don't know, right? I guarantee, 9 out of 10 of these people who are making money, nobody in their family has ever been a business owner. They've ever been paid 1099, right? And so they're not even thinking about taxes, right? We work with highly educated people in their 40s and 50s who have no clue how you're going to owe taxes on 1099 income. And, a lot of 18-year-olds are going to go spend all of this money that they're making. And it's not really fun to go spend the $400,000 you made and then realize that you have $100,000 of taxes and you don't really have any money left over because you bought a car and you got some jewelry and all of those different types of things. So it's really important that the team can help keep you in check before you make one mistake and you're like, oh man, how do I get back on track? Because then if you're 100,000 behind, next year you make 4, now half of that has gone to last year's taxes plus this year's taxes, then your team. Catch up's never fun.
That's true. What's interesting in my world, and this is just based on my personal experiences, it may not be true for every lawyer, but I oftentimes find that I'm either the last or very at the tail end of forming that business team. So typically when I'm brought on, there's already an agent, there's already a financial advisor, maybe already an accountant. But usually the agent and the financial advisor are already in place. Now, what does sometimes happen is I'm brought on and sometime later in the relationship, I'm told by the athlete or someone else on the business team, we need to change financial advisors. And then we start conducting diligence in that space. But it is very rare that the attorney is the first person that comes on board. I will say, though, and I'm basing that off of, again, 14, 15 years of experience, it's starting to change a little bit. And maybe it's due to the NIL type of client. I have started to get a few clients in the NIL space where I'm actually the first person who's being brought on with respect to the business team. And that's pretty interesting because, again, that's rarely the case.
It's probably a lot of like the branding yourself now, right? Like I need my own business. I need to get equity deals. I need to have a lot of negotiations, and probably people a lot of times associate with that. I also think it's probably credit to you and some other people of like building a good brand around this, right? Like, 15 years ago, there's no way to discover people like this. And now like people can follow you on social media, see you on the news, whatever, and be like, I need that guy as soon as I'm starting to make money.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. One thing I would say too on the team aspect, and Darren, I think you hit the nail on the head there, that I would tell anybody, entrepreneur, athlete, otherwise, but especially young athletes, when you're coming into this money at a young age, oftentimes maybe they've seen the person that's on their team in the news. Darren, you have a great personal brand. You've done a great job. marketing yourself as really the go-to expert in the NIL space, right? But I think it's really important for athletes to understand that ultimately everybody on the team works for them. And this was something that was a shift for me when I was an 18-year-old, when I hired a high-profile agent and I hire all these people on my team. And I remember my agent at the time telling me, he's like, hey, just remember, I work for you. And it was this profound shift in my mind. But I think to your point, the thing that people miss is like the team needs to hold each other accountable. You need to have people on the team that are willing to have the tough conversations if one person on the team isn't doing the job that they said they were going to do. Because I think too often times we see, and Thomas, we see this with entrepreneurs too, where somebody's not holding up their end of the bargain, but nobody's said anything for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And then all of a sudden the athlete or the entrepreneur finds out. And then it's a bad look on everybody that's on that professional team.
Yeah, that's super important. And not even necessarily only just holding the other people accountable, but feeling comfortable to make suggestions. Without mentioning names, something comes to mind recently where a financial advisor asked me to follow up with a listing agent who has a duty to mitigate with respect to a property that my athlete client left, and just asked that I follow up every 2 weeks. Now, without that financial advisor asking me to do so, honestly, it wasn't my idea or thought to do so. I also wasn't sure necessarily that the athlete wanted me to be as communicative with the listing agent. And so by having those types of conversations and everyone being a fiduciary to the athlete and putting themselves behind the best interests of the athlete, I think that's what makes a really successful team.
Definitely. So, I mean, I guess for everybody to know, it's pretty simple, right? You mentioned this, all athletes are going to be paid 1099. I think, like, I don't really see any ways they're going to be paid W-2 that would make sense. So they are running a business. That's why that incorporation matters. But like, what are some of the mistakes you see some of these younger athletes making? Because I think we're still so new to this, right? It's not like you can look up into a ton of other athletes who have been in their shoes and get their advice. But you've gotten to work with athletes, so maybe you see some of the mistakes where they're like, man, I wish I would have just done this, a lot sooner. I wish I could teach. And I know the leagues are in a lot better of a situation now where they are really focused on education. I mean, we've all seen the documentaries of like every, 90% of athletes are bankrupt within 4 years. Yeah. And, that's an exaggeration. I don't remember the story. Jacob, you posted it last week and it was like somebody is bankrupt and he's like 7 million in real estate and some of these things. So it might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but I think it's still somewhat of a reality.
Yeah. I can't really speak to the tax related nightmares. I have not heard of any public stories where athletes are in trouble, NIL related athletes are in trouble with the IRS. I would have to imagine that they're abound, that there are many athletes who have not properly put aside money to pay the IRS on April 15 or do estimated taxes, etc. I also have not yet heard of any horror stories revolving around financial advisors, even though we've heard so many irresponsible efforts by financial advisors with respect to professional athletes over the years. From where I sit, what I've seen that bothers me are the athletes who don't read the contracts that are provided to them and just sign them. Read them, but don't understand them. Don't feel as though it's necessary to hire competent counsel to explain what the terms mean, to negotiate those terms with the other side, sometimes to even have an arm's length agreement memorialized in writing. There's far too many of these relationships that are being built in the NIL space where there's not a written document with spaces for individuals to execute their names, or in the instance where there's an LLC on behalf of the LLC. And that's what scares me. I've already dealt with some arbitration in the NIL space for athletes who fortunately had documents in writing with brands when the brands did not perform according to what was necessary. I'm largely afraid for the instances where there's not going to be anything in writing, or the athlete's going to realize that the contract is extremely one-sided. And then we have this big burden of trying to argue that the deal in itself is unconscionable and that it should not be enforced or otherwise. And it's coming. It happens in every industry. You don't usually see it right away, but I expect it. And that's, I guess, what I wouldn't say fearful of, but that's what I see as an issue for some athletes coming down the road.
To me, this goes back to that tug and pull of you want to hire a good professional team around you, but at the end of the day, the money, the things that you're doing in your life, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're an athlete, are still going to be your responsibility. I'll never forget my mom as an 18-year-old telling me literally that, like, we will help you build the team of people, but at the end of the day, it's your responsibility. And Darren, I think you make a great point there that the athlete doesn't need to be the expert on what that legal document says. You're the expert on the legal document, but they do need to understand the basics of, if I'm signing this document, what is it saying that I need to perform in real life in order to potentially get this money, and how might that affect me? And is there any other ways that I should be thinking about this? Because one of the biggest issues that I see with athletes is they hear something that somebody else did, somebody in the locker room, somebody that they talk to at the gym, and then they think they want to do that. Sometimes that works, but oftentimes that athlete that they were talking to is in a completely different situation than maybe they're in, and they're getting information that isn't so much bad, but it doesn't relate to their own personal life.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, gosh, when I first started practicing, the big thing was athletes wanting to get into like the restaurant and hospitality industries. Like every athlete
always a good investment.
Right? I mean, gosh, I wouldn't personally put my money into that, but I always heard horror story after horror story of athlete having a friend who, needed some cash for an opportunity. And then it became like franchising model was the big thing being pushed on a lot of athletes. And look, some have been very successful, even on the restaurant and hospitality industry side, on the franchising and whatnot, but you have to conduct your due diligence. You have to make sure it's fully audited from the financial perspective. You have to make sure on the legal side, everything's buttoned up. I mean, staying away from friends who are looking for loans. I've seen so many instances where athletes just hand over cash to friends, sometimes without even a promissory note in place. Other times with a promissory note that I wonder who drafted it, probably found on Google. I mean, there's a lot of garbage out there, which again, just ultimately breeds more problems and I guess more money for lawyers. I'd rather the athletes spend it on earlier and prevention. But yeah, we're always going to see that type of thing happening. You talk about locker room discussions. I mean, going back to something I alluded to before, NFTs, but crypto at large, that was a big thing for some time where there was so much FOMO among athletes who weren't in the game and then got in when like Bitcoin was above $60,000 and are waiting for the day that it comes back. I think it's at 46, 47,000. So if you held tight, maybe you're almost back
coming out this week. They might be okay.
There you go. Yeah. So maybe you're close to even. But gosh, I mean, how much diligence did they really do into it? And was it more like all my buddies doing it, I got to be involved?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would love with the last few minutes for us, just because I know I haven't heard anything about it, to talk through kind of some good financial planning principles for these type of people to have. And I think this is really applicable to really any solopreneur. I mean, we all were there when we started our business, right? Like we set up a business and then you have to figure out, what do you even do with this money in the first place? So Jacob, like, I'd love to hear from you. Like, what are some of the initial things you think about that are really important?
I think the first thing that is really important for folks to understand, whether it's an athlete or a new entrepreneur, is understanding what the tax rates are and what your current tax rate is going to be, with the notion in mind of what a future tax rate is going to be. Because for most of these athletes, the first time that they're earning money is this NIL income, but the hope and the goal would be that they're ultimately going to be earning, hopefully millions of dollars down the road as a professional athlete. So even some of these top earning NIL athletes might be making 50, 100,000, maybe a couple 100,000 a year in college. And they're going to be in a lower tax bracket then than they're potentially going to be in the future. And I say that because we always think about tax planning as this lifetime game. So what are some things that they could do? I mean, the first thing that always comes to mind for me is making Roth IRA contributions. And if you're over the income limit, doing a backdoor Roth IRA contributions, because they're not running into the pro rata rule. They don't have existing IRA dollars. And then the second thing is ultimately, if they're making enough money, much to Darren's point, incorporating as an LLC and electing as an S corporation can potentially save them big money on taxes. But a lot of that stuff needs to be done with the idea in mind of like, what are we trying to get to in the future? This isn't like a 1-year plan for them to do. And then I think, Thomas, in conjunction with that, one of the things that we always talk to our clients about is the idea of the solo 401k and how powerful it can be. What I would tell anybody, though, listening is what's so impactful about any of these strategies is if you can do them on the upfront. At a young age, you can make that first Roth IRA contribution. One, it starts building the muscle of saving. But two, you have such this long time horizon to let that money compound.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, like you have to start to view your money as money comes in and it has a few uses. One is spending, like, hey, you can enjoy this, right? We're not saying don't do anything fun with it. The next one is taxes. You don't have a choice there. And the next one is to save, really, right? Like you don't know, maybe you're going to have 4 years of NIL and it's going to be good. And then you're going to go play overseas and you're never really going to make that much money again. Or maybe you're going to do well and you're going to go and play professional sports and you're going to make a good amount of money. But you want to build that principle of like, you don't spend everything, you have taxes, and then you have investing, right? Because most of these athletes, they're going to have a significant drop in income when they're done, whenever that is. Even if it's post NIL, maybe it's post professional, being a professional athlete, but you might never have much of an income again, or you might have a discounted amount. And so you need to use these times where you are making way more money and have a good amount of surplus to be saving and investing for the future. And it's the same for any solopreneur, right? Like it's easy to want to invest back in your business. It's easy to want to spend those dollars and say you'll save later, but these might be some of the best earning years that you have. And you don't want to just say, I'll save later, because the people who say that don't ever end up saving.
Yeah, well, I think that ties in nicely with everything that we talked about. If there's one piece of wisdom from this, I think it's build that right financial team, that professional team, much like Darren talked about, much like Thomas talked about. Darren, it's been great to have you on the long game, man. For those that want to connect with you and connect with Heitner Legal and explore working with you and your team, where can they best find you?
What's up, guys?
You're good, Darren. Keep going.
Okay. No, you can find me at Darren Heitner, DarrenHeitner on Twitter. It's my name on LinkedIn. And then my website, the law firm website, is heitnerlegal.com. That's HEITNER legal.com. Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Yeah, man. Thank you for listening, and everybody. Thanks for watching and hopefully checking out YouTube for one of our first episodes. We really appreciate you guys. Please rate, subscribe, and we will see you back next week.